tariffs are not a good economic policy. You can make a case that tariffs um, in a specific industry versus a specific country um, is like good national security, but as an economic policy, it is bad economics. It will lead to constraint of your economy. So you will bring less money in, um, and it will lead to higher prices, right? So when you have a constraint in the economy, that means that your economy is slowing down. That typically means when uh, companies are bringing less money in, they have to fire people. So that means unemployment goes up. Also, at the same time, you're raising the prices on goods because of the tariffs, which means that inflation goes up, which means that you have this thing that we had in the 70s called stagflation.
So, uh, on the tariffs,
Yes.
because I think we need to talk about this in a future podcast, because I have heard great arguments on both sides of this conversation, and I am equally excited and terrified because, uh, and I'll talk about my perspective on the voting and all of that in a bit. But when it comes to tariffs specifically, like the outcome, if it works, could be tremendous. If it doesn't, and it hasn't in the past, it could be disastrous. But it's super high risk, super high reward, also super high punishment.
So
You know,
what do you think the reward is?
if it works, we have fair trade with all nations, and we have a tax less economy where we're not taxed. We're not taxed on sales tax or death tax or income tax. Like all of that is taken away. Tariffs are the taxes, and maybe things are more expensive on our end, but there's more money flowing around. Clearly, a bit of inflation there, but um, that's the idea that the tariffs then are substituted for taxes. We're not really paying those, and we have fair trade with all nations. That's that's the like the 2 year old explanation of the good outcome of everything. Taxes go away, tariffs take their place. We have more money in our pockets, and we all walk on streets of gold and have gumdrops falling out of the sky.
Why do you think we would have more money in our pockets?
Because we have less taxation. Less
But you
taxation means
but
I keep the money that I get.
you just said that the tariffs were going to replace the taxation,
Correct.
implying that there would have to be enough tariffs to um, offset what we would lose revenue wise from getting rid of or from greatly lowering the taxes, which means that because we end up paying the tariffs, like you end up paying the tariffs on higher costs, right? Like that's how it works. So
That's
if
debatable.
it's not that is pretty set in stone. And you're a business owner, so you would know as well. Like if your soap starts costing $20 instead of $10, you're not going
Oh,
to
trust
say
me. Yeah.
um, you're not going to say, oh, I'm going to eat the cost here. You're going to say, oh, I need to raise my prices because I don't have enough to make my margins anymore. Right. So when we talk about like Walmart had a profit of 2.97% last year. That was their profit margin. So if you're talking about a 20% tariff on China or a 10% tariff on anybody else, they have to raise their prices, right? That is going to end up.
Unless unless taxation is gone, corporate taxes and the taxing on all of that goes away. Sales tax is offset, corporate taxes are offset, and then they can keep their margins the same. But it's it's taken away in the tariffs rather than taxes.
Right, but that means that we would have to consume so much more of the goods while they're at a higher price.
I'm not reading you. So the
So
way I, the way I'm
so
saying,
so so
corporations are paying their taxes.
right.
I'm an S corp, and so um, I'm paying it on the end of like employment taxes and things like that. But corporations are paying their taxes. If those taxes are then turned into tariffs instead, and that's obviously a very basic explanation of it, but one is substituted for the other essentially. That instead of corporations paying 20% taxes, it's a 20% tariff on Chinese goods. Then their margins remain the same. The price of the product doesn't have to go up. It's still the same. They're just taking the money out at a different end of the transaction.
No, because you're lowering your capex. Because if I know that, hey, I'm on track to make like $5.8 billion this year, I know what my tax rate is, right? I know what my taxes are going to be. I can plan for that. If you're talking about me having to pay tariffs on supplies as they come through, I don't know what that is going to look like. I don't know if I'm going to get more um, like people wanting shirts this month versus shoes this month. Right? So when I order things, I'm going to have to pay that premium up front, right? And if I'm wrong, now I'm at a huge, like a much bigger disadvantage than I am if I'm paying the taxation off of the revenue that I've already produced.
If you know what the tariffs are, and then you can also look at extrapolated data over a previous decade and see like these if you're looking retail specifically, these corporations have things down to a crazy minute psychological science here. So they know what sells when it sells, and being able to track tariffs from specific nations and importers, you can easily manage that. And the same people that are doing accounting for taxes on the back end can do accounting for tariffs on the front end, and they can handle that transactional exchange it's not that big of a difference, man. And
Well,
then you and again, this is coming from I'm not 100% sold on tariffs. I'm scared, but I think that it may work. Maybe it could. It would be exciting if it did. It might not, because most of the time bad things happen. So that's Murphy's law. And so,
yeah,
um,
so
but look,
so
if they're able to track taxes, they're able to track trends, they're able to track all of that. They can also exchange where their vendors are. So if Vietnam has a 5% tariff when China's got a 20% tariff, well, of course, we're going to work more with Vietnam and we'll switch our vendors over there. And uh, it, it's good business on their end. Then their margins go up even further, and the taxation remains the same on the end of the transactions. And so I'm not sure where they're losing on that.
well, because you're not just buying like a basis of things, right? So when you're talking about inventory, you're talking about inventory that is like specific categories. You're talking about some things that are in season, some things that are not in season, right? So could it work in like the most ideal like utopia situation of like, hey, like we know exactly what people are going to buy, we know exactly what we need to order, we know exactly like all of these different things. Sure, but what you're doing is you're throwing in so many different variables that don't need to be there, right? And the other thing that I would ask, and I mean, we can kind of go over this when we go over tariffs. Is what what do you define as free trade or as fair trade? Because for me, I don't want fair trade as an American. Um, because fair trade for me as an American means that I'm in a worse spot than I was before we had fair trade, because we get the better advantage of the trade right now with everybody. Um, I don't want to go to a situation where China is getting a fair end of things with me, or Vietnam is getting a fair end of things with me. I don't want that because that means that I have gone down on the totem pole.
Explain.
Okay, so right now what happens is that um, one, what we do in America is we have companies that say, okay, I am going to do manufacturing on very high end finishing very profitable side of like the very profitable side of things, right? I can do that because like my margins are really huge here, whether it be software, whether it be like CNC stuff and everything else. What uh, what I'm going to do for the low skill end of things, where the profit margin is much smaller, is I'm going to have China or Vietnam or another country make that where their profit margin is a lot larger, right? So that I can get that for 80% cheaper, 90% cheaper than I would if I was making it in the United States. I can take that component and I can put it into the finished product that I'm making. And now instead of selling Nike shoes for 100 and or for like $400, I can sell it for $100. And that profit margin now gets to pay all of my employees, whether at the store level, at the corporate level, all of those different things. If you're going to make a fair trade where, well, we're not going to do that anymore. We don't want an advantage of having profit margin on this of from our good, because that's why you create tariffs, right? You create tariffs because you want your manufacturing in the United States to be competitive, right? Like that's the entire thing. So
I think that's part of the. I think manufacturing to be competitive in the United States to give people vocational opportunities is part of it. I think the other part of tariffs is to say, look, you are marking up the tariffs of our exports 245%. And we have only been marking yours at 5%. And so, look, let's work this out. I think tariffs are also being used as a trade weapon to enact more alliances and policies. I think it's used as a bully tactic. I don't know how effective. I actually don't think that's going to be effective at all, but I believe they're being used as a bully tactic to help strong arm the world into cooperating the way we want them to.
yeah,
Um,
so do you know what the tariff rate on the United States was pre-Trump, of like the aggregate of what people were charging us tariff wise?
well, you have to look at there's so many different factors of like which specific imports exports we're talking about and which countries and like uh, doing
28,
the average of all of those is crazy.
2.5% is what we were paying, is what people were charging us, 2.5%. Um, and that was pretty consistent across the board. Now there are like developing countries that have huge tariffs, right? Which makes sense. They don't want their labor outsourced and everything else. But for the vast majority of things, when you're talking about Canada, when you're talking about Mexico, when you're talking about China, when you're talking about Vietnam, when you're talking about all of these different things, the tariff rate is very, very, very low. Um, much, much lower than 10, 20, 30, 40%. Um, Now there are like trip falls of like, oh, if you go over a certain amount, then like this gets triggered. Those never get triggered. And the reason why those don't get triggered is because the United States has so much soft power. People want to do business with the United States because we're predictable. We know, well, we were predictable economically, right? Like you knew what you were going to get from us. Whether now I don't know if that's the case anymore.
No
Um,
one knows.
you knew like from a government structure that for the most part we're pretty